Good morning and welcome to today's GCSA webinar, Best Management Practices for the Turf Care Center with Gary Bogdanski. My name is Lisa Wick. I'm the Senior Manager of E-Learning Programs here at GCSAA and today's moderator. Before I turn things over to Gary, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's event. You'll receive access to that recording via follow-up email. We do have several handouts that you can download from your GoToWebinar control panel. If your control panel has minimized, you'll see a narrow strip with an orange rectangle at the top. Click on that and your control panel will open and you'll have access to the handouts. You'll also see the question answer box. Please type your questions as we go along today. If you have a telephone or microphone connection you want to ask a question directly, you can use the raise hand button and I'll unmute you at an appropriate time and you can ask your question directly. Gary Bogdanski is the equipment manager at the Sharon Golf Club and has over 31 years experience in that position. He earned an associate degree in mechanical technology from the University of Akron. Bogdanski served on the 2017, 2018, and 2019 GCSAA Equipment Manager Task Group and has completed Equipment Management Certification Program Levels 1 and 2. Bogdanski has authored articles on golf course maintenance and pesticide storage facilities. He is a contributor to the EMCP study guides and has presented shop safety with an emphasis on OSHA practices. Please join me in welcoming today's presenter, Gary Bogdanski. Gary?
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to, present this webinar on a topic that's, can be very complex. I've over the years, try to simplify it. So what I'm going to do is kind of do a show and tell. I'll go over some of the types of regulations that may be involved, some of the parts of the Turf Care Center that we'll touch on, and just kind of like look at some pictures, tell some items about the pictures, maybe a couple stories. We'll just kind of see how it goes. This is my first live webinar, and I'm happy to present it. On the slide in front of us is the maintenance operations can have environmental and safety impact. So I'd like to cover over chemical storage, which would be our pesticide storage area, maybe some storage areas where you have some solvents, some fuels, small use, high flammability products. Equipment storage would cover all the equipment that maintains the course, how you house it, why it's important to have equipment storage. Then we'll cover over our maintenance area and repair activities, which is kind of typically called the shop, the shop area. And we'll get into some fueling operations and how fuel storage and fueling operations have changed over the years from when I first got into business. And then we'll kind of touch on some equipment washing here at the end with with environment and conservation issues. Regulatory considerations. So, local and state regulations, they vary from, state to state, location to location, country to country. And it's hard to cover, the whole area with like one regulation and one particular webinar. Most of what I'm going to talk about is, because I'm based in Ohio, is the Ohio regulations and some of the local regulations we have here. So it's a pretty general, broad area of regulations. Now, you may be in certain situations, and especially in cities or certain states where you have very specific regulations. So those when you get involved in this type of area, you need to consult some of your local jurisdictions and see how the regulations change. But in general, we're going to go over some of these areas of regulations, in particular oil storage, spill prevention control, and countermeasure regulations, which is known as SPCC. That would be more along the lines of your fueling station, where you store fuels, where you store oil, anything with a large quantity of product. And typically it's maybe something that requires secondary containment. And along with the secondary containment, if it's a large enough quantity, then you have to have some kind of spill prevention control and countermeasure in place, which is basically a written plan. If something were to happen, these are the steps that we carry out to, stop the spill, remediate the spill and clean up. So we'll talk about that area. Hazardous waste would be kind of like if you're paint waste, maybe solvents. If you've got a parts washer that's solvent based, you're going to generate what's known as used solvents, spent solvents, which are considered hazardous waste. So there's certain regulations, certain paperwork that goes along with processing that waste. Your solid waste would be something along like tires, fluorescent bulbs. It may be it may be something that requires an actual area to take your solid waste to, like such as tires, batteries. Typically batteries are something that are needed to be recycled. It's almost like law that you have to recycle a battery. That's why there's always a battery core charge when you purchase a battery. That you bring the old battery in, because lead recycling has been something that's been prevalent for years and years. The Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. So if you store large quantities of a particular product, it could be fuels, could be gasolines, it could be acids. There's a certain threshold. Once you get above that quantity, that if something were to happen, it could affect the community. So you would have to have in place a plan for if something catastrophic happens. Fortunately for most golf courses, our storage is fairly minimal. We're not into this large tanks and drums of potential hazardous products. Industrial wastewater would be how you process any water, in particular equipment washing. If you're washing down your sprayer, how you process that. So there's certain regulations there, certain things that are permitted, not permitted to do with that wastewater. So we'll look at that area. Underground storage tanks. When I first got in the business, we had underground fuel tanks, and now the preferred method is for above ground fuel tanks. These could be applied to your gasoline tanks, your diesel tanks, maybe even if you have heating oil tanks. Anything that's underground, there's certain regulations there. Stormwater, it's anytime you plan, whether it's a new construction site, there has to be a plan to where the stormwater goes. And also there's something new, relatively new in our area, is stormwater fees. Where the golf course sits, we actually sit about a mile south of the Continental Divide. So the water from here, stormwater from here, would run down, make its way to Ohio River, down to Mississippi, and to the Gulf of Mexico. A mile north of here, the water goes north, flows into Lake Erie, out Ontario, and St. Lawrence Seaway makes it to the Atlantic Ocean. What's been occurring is stormwater fees north of here for the water that runs into Lake Erie. So there's an assessment made on how many hard surface areas you have, whether it's the roof, or if you have asphalt, like parking lot, and then you're charged accordingly to how much hard surface area you have, which generates stormwater runoff. So in a way, I think they're trying to promote, green space, because you're not charged for turf areas, but you're charged for hard surface areas. So that brings us to our first participant poll.
It does. And we're going to gather a little bit of audience info. If none of those titles is reflective of who you are, if you're an other, you can type that in the question answer box for us. And there's no penalty for being an other, right?
No. I think it was a way to, I could, in my bio, you kind of know who I am, and I just kind of an idea who's in the audience, and kind of get an idea of maybe some of the things that may be of particular interest to some of the different job titles.
And I think that's good. This is a question that is common, and it helps our instructors to be able to target their remarks a little bit better. Okay, Gary, that's what your audience is comprised of today. None of your fellow equipment managers have joined us.
They're
Somebody's
busy.
getting scolded. They are busy. That's true.
They are busy, but no, that's okay, because a lot of the material that I present is fairly pertinent to the superintendent. Maybe when we get into some of the shop items, might be more equipment manager.
Well, and I mentioned to you, one of the things that we'll be doing is perhaps now that we can do shorter segments and still provide education points, is providing this with in chapters in the Learning Hub as part of our recording.
Yes, because I do break it down into different areas. So where I'd like to start out here is with the chemical storage. This storage was built about the mid 90s. When I started here in the late 80s, and it's kind of funny because I always remember the sprayer was a tow behind sprayer. I think it was a Myers. It had a little rope that you pulled it to start the boom. You pulled it to shut it off. Very simple. It didn't have any of this electrical over hydraulic, and they used to pull with a 3-wheel Cushman. They pulled it up right next to the lunchroom here at the maintenance building because there was a hose fixture there. So they would pull up, drop the hose in. They could run inside real quick, and they could look out the window and kind of keep an eye on the sprayer. And if it started to get too full, they could hurry up and run out and shut it off. And me being a technician, equipment manager, I thought, this isn't right. There's got to be a better way. So after a series of conversations, and I said, well, let's start, looking at building a separate building, away from our maintenance area, and one that could just, house the chemicals that we use. You could load in there, and everything would be just contained. So we looked at an area, and you could see this area here. It's kind of wide open, so you got access for trucks and for deliveries. And the design that, let's see, I show, trying to find, use my arrow key.
You have to click again because I did the poll.
Ah, okay. All right. Gotcha. Okay. So we laid this area out from our existing maintenance building, and it's roughly 135 feet. And we took into account, even the direction of maybe prevailing winds and things like that, so that we were, fairly far enough away, but yet close enough to access. If you notice on the left, and this will come in later, this little fuel area, that's 50 feet away. 50 feet seems to be kind of the magic number for distance from from buildings, so that you're far enough away if you had a fire or some other problem, I guess maybe access for fire trucks, maybe the fire won't jump from building to building. So when we first developed this, I drew this drawing up, and this was kind of like looked at by quite a few people on the staff and how it was going to flow. So we're always looking at flow pattern. It's like, all right, traffic comes in here, and we've got golf course equipment coming in here, and how are we going to make sure this flows nice. So once we set out on the location, then they started on the design of this building, and it's a 1,600 square feet building. There's 4 areas in it. So we've got 2 storage rooms, a mixed load area, and a fertilizer storage area. Now at the time, mid 90s, early 90s, there wasn't a lot of regulations in place. Most regulations were for very large commercial operations where semi trucks would come in and offload material or load material. And I was fortunate to go along with it was an inspector from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. So in Ohio, the Ohio Department of Agriculture regulates pesticide usage, pesticide storage, and anything to do with any of those agrochemicals. And he showed me an area where a semi truck would come in, big tank, would offload to, and I think there were 1,000-gallon stainless steel tanks. Now this was for mainly field crops like soybeans and corn. We looked at the way they designated their area, for their secondary containment and how they had it laid out and the coatings on the floor. And so I kind of just took that and incorporated it and just scaled it down. I didn't need anything where I was pulling a semi truck in and offloading. So this plan that we developed, I took it to as many sources as I could to get as many ideas. And I've had some conversations with the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, on some of the floor coatings. And I talked to Oklahoma State University because they were working on mixed load area, in particular sump construction. So there was a lot of thought involved in this particular design. And then what was nice was, because of my background, I was a CAD operator, so I could draw drawings, make changes, and just keep them going. We didn't have to hire an architect to come up with this initial plan. So the building itself was the emphasis is for containment and fire resistance. So we wanted to make sure the building had no outgoing drains. That way we didn't have to worry about anything possibly leaking out, getting into either the sanitary or the storm sewer, and that this is just going to be self-contained. Now, one thing about being a self-contained building and fire resistance is the fire department, they look at that building like that and they say, well, okay, so a building like that catches on fire with the chemicals in it, they're basically going to let it burn. They're not going to try to put it out because they want to add water into it, because now your self-contained building is no longer self-contained. You've got water flowing out all over the ground, and if it's contaminated with any of the chemicals, then your cleanup is going to be, more costly than if the building is just contained. Fortunately, most chemicals these days are very low, flammability. So we felt pretty confident by constructing this building out of masonry block. We took the block itself, we took the walls, and we extended them all the way to the roof deck, so we provide some fire break. The chemical storage rooms for their secondary containment is actually a step down of 6 inches, and it's what's known as a monolithic pour. So you step down into the storage rooms themselves. The loading area has a sloped area that slopes back to that sump, and it provides containment itself. And then along with this, we want to add in, make sure we had ventilation. So chemical storage buildings have both a power ventilator and natural ventilation. And then the power vents are all connected to the light switches. So when you turn the light switch on, the fans themselves come on. So here you can see on the side of this building here, this is the power vent. This is the natural vent. Then we have a cross vent over here. So this is the same room. And these vents are open all the time, and they have a fusible link. So if a fire were to occur, the link would melt, those vents would close off. Here's the main opening to the building, and you can see how the storage rooms are laid out here. You see some of the safety with the emergency shower that's in place. We've got an overhead water boom here that when you pull the sprayer in, you can hook it up. It's got a flow meter located here, so you can tell, how many gallons are flowing into the sprayer itself. And signage. Signage is very important. So we've got signs on the areas that are the pesticide storage area, and then we have signs for the fertilizer storage area. So the storage rooms themselves are roughly 12 by 12. And like I said, the floor itself is a monolith poured concrete, which is where the foundation part, where the walls are built, are setting on a slab itself. Instead of the conventional, where typically you'd build a foundation, then you build the walls up, and then you would pour a concrete floor. Well, when you do that, then you end up with this seam where the floor meets the wall. So to eliminate that, we did the monolith pour. To add to the fire resistance in the storage rooms, we put this, what they call a Type X gypsum board, which is basically 5/8 inch thick fireproof drywall that's doubled up. We added electric heat. As much as we like to try to run inventory down, especially in Ohio, it can get fairly cold. Like even this morning it was 16 degrees. We have to worry about product freezing. And we started out with one room with electric heat, and then the second room we added heat. It always seems that suppliers like to run these end of the year inventory sales. So we end up taking product on sometimes close to winter or in the middle of winter. So the heat is needed to protect the product. And what we also did was we felt that we needed to add some kind of monitoring system. So we were able to tie these rooms into our security system with a temperature probe. So if the temperature drops down too low, 35 degrees, it sends out an alarm, and somebody gets a phone call and says, hey, we got the heat, this room is dropping. And it always happens coldest night of the year. There's something might happen where the power goes out or something, and so it's good to have that as backup. And then light fixtures, we just went with the typical, at the time, fluorescent sealed light fixture. I think this day and age we'd go with LED. It seems to be the way to go with fixtures. And now the floor coating, this epoxy phenolic resin floor coating, is a floor coating that when I talked to it was Michael Broder at the Tennessee Valley Authority, there was a coating that was used to line railroad tanker cars for chemicals, especially agricultural chemicals. So when they're hauling chemicals on the railroad, and they line these steel tanks with this particular coating, it stops the corrosion, and it holds up well. So we thought, well, that was a good product to go with. It was reasonable, and we applied it in 2 different layers. The first layer, let me move ahead here if I got. The first layer is a light blue. So we put 2 coats of that on, and then the second layer we did with this battleship gray. And the reason being is if the gray starts to wear thin, then the blue will show up. So then you know your coating's becoming compromised. And you can see how this monolith pour works, this slab, and then it's coved up here 6 inches, and then the walls build on top of that. This room here, as secondary containment, would hold roughly 550 gallons. Now, most of your product, if you're getting in 2.5 gallon jugs, 1 gallon jugs, you might get some mini bulk tanks, but for the most part, unless there was an act of vandalism and somebody came in and stabbed every container you had or something, that you should be all right with that amount of secondary containment. Let me back up here. So as we go into this room, this light switch here, as you turn it on, you'll see this light come on, and then you'll hear the exhaust fan come on. So that way, when you enter the room, already have the exhaust fan running, and if there's any residual fumes in there, they're being pulled away. Signage, again, very, very important. This be careful, step down. It's mainly for guests or somebody not familiar with the building. You hate to see somebody trip and fall. And then we have a sign here, which kind of gives you a general category of what's in that room, so that you know if you're looking for a particular item, and you can kind of say, well, this fungicides are going to be in this room, and you know where to start. Shelving, we started out with metal shelving because at the time, plastic, there really wasn't any good plastic that I felt was suitable. Now, plastics have really improved in the last 20 years, and plastic would probably be the way to go for durability and corrosion resistance. Stainless steel would be the ultimate. The price of stainless steel shelving was just astronomical at the time. So we went with the metal shelving, and periodically we'll take these apart and repaint them. Labeling, for inventory is great. Our administrative assistant, she does all the inventory, so she does all the labeling. She sets it up just how she wants it, and it looks great. So if you got a blank spot on the shelf, it's like, oh, I wonder what was there. And then if you get new product, where to put the product. So it's labeling is almost how can I say it? Needed on a lot of things, and you'll see as we go through this webinar where it becomes really important, especially with HazCom situations. So, this sometimes seems like maybe a good idea. Oh, hey, I'll put my SDSs and maybe some of my other information right there with the chemical. But it's not, because you want to know, if you're going to work with a product, you want to know, what you're working with before you even get involved with the product. So typically, you're probably going to be down in the maintenance office. You're going to go over it with the superintendent. It's like, hey, we're going to be spraying this product, and be working with this product, and you're going to have to look at this PPE, and you have to know, what the hazards are. So it all begins there. So this is where it should be, in the office. Couple things here to make note of this inventory: chemicals, fertilizer, and seed. Inventory in general is important for some of these areas of regulation, especially in the spill prevention control. And maybe if you had a community right to know issue, how much, what you're inventorying and how much. So we have a general sheet of inventory. I kind of list it by our items that are the most hazardous, maybe the most flammable, and then write down the quantities that we typically have on hand. So we kind of have a running idea, and this is a great list for fire department. Because we always try to get the fire department involved as much as we can with any of our buildings and what we store in there, and maybe where some of the hazards are and some of the potential issues. Because the relationship with the fire department has really helped us out over the years, as far as, you know, if we're thinking about a building or how we have to worry about protection or fire protection, then the fire department has been a great resource to use. Plus, most of the time, especially in our case, local fire department has a jurisdiction over a lot of these things that are deemed, you know, hazardous or flammable.
So Gary, I see on the shelf there's one binder labeled safety training, and a question has come in: what kind of emergency response protocol do you have? Are those numbers posted? Is there a call tree?
Okay, so
Is that all in your safety training binder there?
Okay, the safety training is actually a log of all the safety training that the staff has undertaken. So
okay.
if it's training on whether it's like for instance chainsaws or chippers or CPR or trenching, it's all housed in that. Now, by every phone that we have in the building here in the shop, and we have phones in every building. There's a little chart there with all the extensions and emergency numbers. You know, if there's a problem, who to call. So part of your spill prevention program is basically a plan. It's like, okay, I have this something happened, major issue. I got, say it's your fuel tanks. I got fuel running down the driveway. It's like, okay, so who do I call? Who do I notify? And then how do I stop this spill? So maybe it's maybe you have certain covers that you put over your drain so it doesn't run down there. Maybe you have a spill kit. How do you handle that emergency? You know, right here, in the matter of fact, we have a dam on the property, and if you look down here where it says EAP, it's an emergency action plan. So even for the dam, so say the dam, you know, there was a rupture or a problem with the dam, it's like, you know, who do you call? Who do you notify? Does that answer?
Yeah, I think so. And that's another good reason that all those things are in the office rather than in the other room with the items.
Right, because if the chances of having one of these catastrophes happen in the office is kind of slim, but if you had the item next to the storage, or in the storage room, or next to the storage unit, then it could pose a problem if it was, you know, in that area where you could not access. In this storage room, we first started out, we thought, well, maybe we're going to have to go with explosion-proof heating. But with the building department, and coupled with our, at the time, MSDSs, and our inventory of what we were going to be storing, it was deemed that it wasn't necessary. We did not have enough flammable items that we'd have to go explosion-proof. So this is actually an explosion-proof electric heater, but it's just conduit, normal plastic conduit. Here you can see this is the ventilation duct, and it is ducted to the floor. So when you turn that switch on, the fan comes on, it pulls from the floor. So that way, if there's any residue vapors that are in the building, that would pull them down out of your breathing area to the floor, and then up and out. With the natural ventilation being open all the time, it's not like the pesticide storages of long ago where they're all sealed up. It's pretty good. It's very breathable. It's not an issue like it was. I can think of our old one it was really tight, no ventilation. When you open the doors, I mean, you just like would tear up. So with the natural ventilation, the way the ventilation we have, it's it's been fine. All these years, it's been good. Here you can see the other room. You can see how the ductwork runs. This is the other electric heater that we added later. Very small unit. Doesn't take a lot of electricity to heat these rooms. They're fairly well insulated. This door here goes to the outside, so we've got basically 2 doors on these rooms. So if you were in that room and something were to happen, at least you'd have a way out, one way or the other. Here's the lighting, just pretty much standard fluorescent lighting that's what we call sealed to the for the bulbs, so that, you know, pretty much like what we call corrosion resistance. This here is a heat detector, which is tied into our fire alarm. So obviously, if there's a problem, this would go off. And we yesterday was funny. We had a couple of guys in to check our fire systems, and you'd think it would put it on test, and they said it was on test, but apparently it wasn't. And all of a sudden, the fire department showed up. So we knew the system worked. Unfortunately, it was a false alarm, but our response rate here is very good for fire department. They are less than a mile away. Now the mixed load area is roughly 24 by 25 feet. Like I said, the room slopes to a trough and a sump. The sump itself and the trough are 304 stainless, and they start roughly, I think, 6 feet in from the overhead door, slope all the way, and then the room slopes, you know, this way, continually this way, and it's pretty good slope. So the idea being that if you had a spill, that you'd want it to, like, you know, make its way to the sump, the trough and sump, you know, fairly quickly. And like I said before, we've outfitted with an overhead water boom, which is great for the operator, and it's up out of the way, especially if you're mixing chemicals into the tank at the time. We've got overhead rinsate tanks, which I'll show in the next picture, emergency shower, and eye wash station, which is required. Anytime you have anything with open containers of chemical, you have to have some kind of emergency shower, eye wash station. Here we can see here's the trough to the sump, and then we've got the overhead rinsate tanks. Now the overhead rinsate tanks, we weren't sure how they were going to work and which way we were going to use them. So we put 3 that we could potentially, if we needed to, you know, segregate product, and then reincorporate it into your next spray, then we could best inventory it, because you need to make sure wherever product you have rinsate, you know what it is, because as soon as your rinsate becomes a mixture of a lot of different things, it's not rinsate anymore. It's hazardous waste. So we always need to make sure that we keep track of the products that we're using and what rinsate we're generating. In Ohio, you can spray out rinsate out in the rough. It's considered spraying out just the same product at the lower rate. If it became an issue where you were not allowed to spray out rinsate anymore, then you could start segregating in tanks and then incorporating into your next mix, you know, at a small percentage, say 5–10%, to use up the rinsate. That's where it becomes important to know what your rinsate is. The sump itself is stainless steel, and it's a double sump with a strainer basket. Then the next sump has the area where the sump pump is. Now these 2 sumps are housed within a larger rectangle sump. And this pipe here is an inspection port. So the idea being is that we've got an in-ground sump with secondary containment, all out of stainless. And I think at the time we looked at different regulations in different states, and you know, the stainless sumps and secondary sumps, you know, kind of popped up a few times. And I had a conversation with Ronald Noyes out of Oklahoma State, who's developing on sumps, and I said, you know, I got an idea for a sump. So I kind of drew up a CAD drawing, sent it to him, we tweaked it a little bit, and had a local fab shop. We fabbed up the sump and put it in, and ever since then it's been, you know, it's been great. Being stainless steel like it is, it's going to be there a long time. Like I said, the emergency shower eye wash unit, that's a necessity. And this is a unit that requires inspection. So, you know, when we talk about BMPs, we also have to talk about not only environmental issues, but we have to talk about safety issues. Particular, some of the OSHA involvement. Myself, I've been working with OSHA on-site consultation the last 10 years. So, you know, we address a lot of these safety issues in the different areas, and you know, it's been a real benefit to just stay on top of changes and updates and regulations. Here we can show a picture of the overhead water boom. Just kind of couples into the tank. And like I said, it has a flow meter. I think this particular sprayer has its own flow meter too. That way you can tell, you know, if you only want to put 100 gallons in or 50 gallons, 150, you can shut it off where you need to. This next slide, just kind of showing here, we've added here in the last 5 years heat in this room. Originally, we didn't have heat, and we've been using this natural gas infrared tube heat, which is great. It's efficient. I've got it throughout the shop. I've got it in another building. So it's definitely, if you're in a climate where you need heat, it's definitely something to consider, you know, for those late fall sprays or those early spring ones. So fertilizer and seed storage. You know, this is basically just I call it warehouse storage. It's a flat floor. We just put a standard epoxy floor coating. We did seal the expansion joints, the saw cut joints in the floor with silicone, just to keep the, you know, debris, especially fertilizer. Fertilizer can be very corrosive to concrete, so that way we keep it out of there. And then we went with pallet racking and wide shelving units. And in this building, we opted just to go with the emergency eye wash station, because we're dealing with, you know, granular material, dry material, so we didn't, the need for the shower wasn't there. And this building, this section of the building is not heated. Now this wall here, we've got this masonry wall, and there's no pass through from the fertilizer area into the chemical area. That was just to add that area of separation, especially maybe in a fire instance. Here we've got a lift truck, and it was showing us Lisa yesterday. I said, "Well, that picture's about 22 years old when I was still fairly young." And the way we laid this building out was, I took this lift truck, and I think I was out in the parking lot, and I just kind of checked the maneuverability, you know, how I could make the swing for the pallet rack, you know, and had room from the other shelving. And on this particular wall here, we could store 18 18 tons of pelletized material. And then on this other, let's see here. Well, here's showing that we made a little modification to the overhead door track. Typically, door comes up and it comes right across here. Well, we thought, well, if we change it, we can add, 2 more tons of space for pallet material. So in planning structure, it's always good to kind of like look things and kind of the flow pattern. The flow pattern's gotta work. So on the left, I've got this wide shelving for individual bags, partial pallets, stuff that you don't need a whole pallet for. And the only thing I would do differently with this room is I would make it a little wider and put pallet racks on this side, because you can accomplish the same thing as I did here with the narrower shelving with a pallet rack. It's just a little deeper, but you also accomplish the ability to put pallets over there. Because what I find now is that we end up with partial pallets, and unless you stack pallet on top of pallet, they take up space on the pallet rack side. So when you get deliveries in, you want to bring them in, you end up setting them on the floor, and you end up moving partial pallets off, putting full pallets on. So it's a little more of a inventory control would make it easier. Here we've got showing the emergency eye wash and some of the normal items. One thing is, if you have a lift truck that runs on propane, you have to make sure you anchor your chain up or anchor your cylinders to the wall. We've got fire extinguisher here. I think at the time we probably had some kind of inventory control here, which now we keep it in the office. That was another thing about having too many locations of SDSs and inventory. It was like, I mean, you had to go around, you had to update all those locations of inventory. One thing I wanted to make mention of concerning lift truck usage is that, in the OSHA, in their programs is, if you have a lift truck, then you actually have to have a what they call powered industrial vehicle, program, where your staff that operate it need to be trained and updated every several years. So when we first started this with the lift truck, we'd have somebody come in and train our staff, and we do it like every 3 years. Now we've gotten to the point where we've done it enough that I actually went to a train-the-trainer program and was able to develop a program for training our own staff on lift trucks. And one thing about lift truck usage has to be, it's site specific. In other words, if you were trained at another facility or another golf course, it really doesn't carry over to the particular golf course you're at, because there's always differences between golf courses and facilities. All right, so on the building itself, if you're planning some kind of construction or some kind of facility, storage unit, and like I said, the local fire department was the key to a lot of our decision making, along with the local building and zoning departments. And then I put down the authority overseeing pesticide storage and applications. Like I said, in our case, it's the Ohio Department of Agriculture that oversees storage and applying of pesticides. The OSHA on-site consultation service, I just highly recommend it. I've used it. They do come through and give you a little bit of a list that you have to accomplish. But as far as with handling your programs, whether it's HAZCOM or the lift truck or your fire safety programs or your emergency action plans, it's a great resource. And they come in and handle the updates. So a lot of times it seems like it's a little bit of an extra daunting task to perform some of these safety things. And I know sometimes, I'm the equipment manager. I've got a lot of equipment to do, but sometimes I still find the time to get in there and perform this, task of, keeping safety programs up to date. Bureau of Workmen's Compensation in Ohio, they offer a lot of safety service oriented training. I'm sure that a lot of other states do as well, and they're a great resource too. They do. I know for Ohio they offer a similar service as the OSHA site consultation. So another great resource. Some of these resources are hard to find. You kind of have to. They just don't jump out, on the website. If I go to Bureau of Workers' Comp or OSHA, but they are improving. They're starting to show up more. So there is help. There is help available for golf courses, small businesses. And lastly, an insurance company. It's always good to run by the, whatever you're proposing, because inevitably, they're the ones going to write the policy, underwrite the policy. So that was always good to be able to get their, approval. So that's my end of chemical storage. And at this point, let's have another participant poll.
Okay, and while people are letting us know the information here, there's a couple questions that have come in about that section. The first one is, would you now consider double doors from mixed load area to chemical storage area?
Double doors from chemical storage to mixed load area. Okay, so in our case, because quantity wise or container wise, we're still gallon, 2.5 gallon jugs. Had not been an issue. And then I'm not sure if it would be something that you're double doors if you wanted to run a lift truck or something in there. But I think trying to keep buildings or rooms, small enough and contained so that if there is an issue or a problem, at least it stays never came up. So it's worked fine for what we've done. Now, if you're in some kind of mini bulk tank or something like that, you may consider doing that.
Okay, and then the second question is, how do you secure the chemical rooms? Is it the overall building that's locked or individual? How does that work?
Okay, so the doors that are locked are door to the mixed load area. And if you're in the mixed load area, then you have access to the chemical storage. I mean, there's no reason to be in the mixed load area unless you're going to be, working with the chemicals. The doors that go out of the storage area, they're locked, and then the fertilizer area, it has its own locked door. So
okay.
because see, sometimes fertilizers, access to the fertilizer area is granted to staff that doesn't have anything to do with, pesticide application. So, whether they need some fertilizer for, whether it's some beds, maybe fertilizer.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So, and we do keep seed in the fertilizer area. So like the range, if they have a supply of seed up where they're at, but when they run low, they come down and get a bag off of us.
Okay, so it looks like we got people all over the place today. Yeah. Pretty even distribution.
That's good. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. So moving on to things that are more dear to my heart, equipment. This is how I got in this business, is like because I like to work on equipment. Growing up on a farm, I grew up on a strawberry farm, And I just remember being 5 years old, my dad put me up on the tractor. I think we were baling hay. He said, just hold the wheel straight. I was driving the wagon. Those guys were throwing the bales of hay on it. So ever since then, it's just fascinated with equipment and tractors. And so here I am. All right, equipment storage. You know, having designated parking places helps to spot potential problems. So there's nothing like putting that equipment in the same spot day after day. The operator knows where he's going to put it away. He knows in the morning where he's going to find it. I can remember when I first started here, we were kind of short on building space, and the shop I had, we had to pull all the utility vehicles in at the end of the day. So if I was working on something here, I kind of had to push it up to the front, and then all these, you know, everybody would just drive in, just park, you know. So you walk in every morning, and just like you never knew where some of the stuff was going to be. So it's great to have enough space to be able to park where it needs to be. In our part of the country, you know, parking in a stored covered area benefit, especially I think they're talking snow next week. You know, that's they have it out of the sunlight, dry, you know, is real great for equipment longevity. And of course, you know, you want to store your pesticide application equipment in the separate area where the chemical storage building is come in great, because everything's there, it's secure, and there's only designated staff to come in contact with that equipment. And flammables and other chemicals, you want to store it separately or in approved like satellite cabinets. So we're gonna move along here. I need to click before I go. All right. So this happens to be an area, one of our buildings where we have a lot of triplexes, a couple utility vehicles, you know, and it's kind of like just cold storage. Pull in, park, and close it, stays dry. You know, typical of golf course, you know, cold storage areas. So when you park a vehicle, and I love this, you know, being an equipment manager, a technician, is like an operator does their walk around before they get on a piece of equipment. If it's in the same spot, they say, hey, you know, I noticed this, you know, spot of oil. So the operator will come to one of us here that work on the equipment, and we can we can go and investigate, see where it's coming from. If you had random spots, you know, I mean, as far as parking places, then, you know, it could have been from another piece of equipment. It could have been from, you know, last week. It's hard to tell. In particular, when the operator that's operating either a triplex or a fairway or a fiveplex, a fairway mower or something, he starts to see spots like hydraulic oil, we want to know. We want to know ASAP. So being in the spot it's at, that works out good. That saves us from scratching our head and figuring out, well, was it from that equipment, or was it from that mower or that mower? One thing you don't want to do is gas, some kind of gas, fuel cans, is just throw them everywhere. So here, this is like a definite no. What you want to do is you want to store them in something like this flammable fire cabinet. So we have several of these around the course buildings. One here in that same storage area I showed a picture before, because we've got some of the utility vehicles, and these guys need to use, you know, some two cycle mixed gas, and it's convenient there. We've got another storage building up close to the clubhouse for the clubhouse grounds, and they've got a cabinet about half this size. Now, this cabinet's great, but if I were to do it all over again, I would get a self-closing cabinet, because I don't know how many times I go by and it's like the door's open. So that would be one recommendation, is it's a little more money, but I would go with the self-closing door. If you have a lot of equipment with battery charging situation, like for instance, here's the golf cart building, and there's a lot of batteries there that are being charged, and the ventilation, there's an exhaust fan, and then there's a duplicate fan that looks just like this on the other side of the building that's intake. So one brings air blowing the end of the building, and another one exhausts it out. Now the way these fans are controlled is we've got this little hydrogen sensor here mounted. There's two of them. It's a fairly long building. There's two of them mounted in there, and they're mounted, and here's a better picture of it. So when the hydrogen level near the ceiling reaches 1%, those fans will kick on. That way the fans aren't running all the time. They're not on a timer, because I think the older building we had, there was a timer. Pretty much ran all night. This one here will come on, it'll run till that 1% kicks off, and then the fan will kick off. Now, if for some reason there's a malfunction with the fans, we get to this 2% level, then it triggers an alarm, and somebody gets a phone call that says, hey, there's something going on, whether the exhaust fans aren't working. So we're getting to this 2% level, because I think at 4% hydrogen, you're getting to the area where you may have a flammable issue. So it's kind of a good peace of mind, and it does work for turning the fans on and off. Now I want to move to equipment maintenance area, which I would call the shop. And this is the area where, the staff, equipment maintenance staff, the ground staff, we're all in this area. We're on top of each other, especially break time, lunch time. So, if something were to happen, it would be, chances are it's going to be in an area like this with a lot of people. And one thing we stress around here is traffic flow. It's like stop signs and one-way signs, and so we try to keep the flow. Like I said before, it's got to flow right. If we're dispensing use of chemicals, whether it's like a degreaser, or if we're painting or anything like that, it's going to be in this area. If we're pouring mixing gasoline, it's going to be more in this area. One of the important things is the HazCom plan. Make sure you have it up to date. Get your chemicals listed. Probably about 5 years ago, they changed this whole plan to the GHS globally harmonized system, which I heartily approve, because now everything is more consistent with the plan. There's pictograms. It was a much needed change on how SDSs are labeled out and how labels are provided. Very uniform. One of the things you want to make sure you have in this area is emergency action plan. So if you were to have some kind of gas leak or a weather issue, or even an earthquake, a tornado, a fire, there's many things can happen, and that's part of some of the OSHA on-site that I've utilized. Is like they help me to develop these plans and which plans are needed. And in a golf course setting, the HazCom emergency action plan, and then of course fire safety plan. Fire extinguishers in general. The what's needed, the inspection of them, that they need to be looked at least every month. And then training for all these plans is key. So you can have many plans in place, but if the training's not there, then the plan just falls short. So we provide, and that's where that book that said safety training. So fire extinguishers, that needs to be done yearly. And so we get the fire department to come in. We get some extinguishers from our fire extinguisher company, give us some, demo units, and we just kind of like, burn stuff, and put it out so that if there was a fire, somebody knew how to operate the extinguisher. So when we first started it, it was like there wasn't too many people that actually operate extinguisher, but afterwards they felt fairly comfortable with this process. CPR, AED training, that's something we do every couple of years. Important to have in place. I even do a little bit of training myself. Here I'm doing it dust masks. If you're working with some of these different products, and if you're using the dust mask, and it's funny about with dust masks, they call it a filtering face piece. So those of you that have maybe seen, I did a 5-minute fix video here a couple years ago, and one of them was on dust masks, and I kind of covered that and what's needed. It's called a voluntary program, but there is certain training involved. It's not just put the dust mask on. Is that to make sure you train how to put it on properly, and the things are required. Like where to use it, where you don't use it, how to store it, don't share it. It's kind of simple things, but still, it's kind of a required item. If you have a shelf that looks like this, then you better get your Sharpie out, because I can't tell one product from another other than the commercially labeled ones. And this is kind of a chronic problem sometimes. I will literally walk through the shop with my Sharpie and make sure that things are labeled. In the past, I've gotten sticky labels put on there, but a lot of times they fall short. They end up falling off. So the Sharpie still seems to be the best thing to do. I could even put a little certain products, if it's real simple, or I could just duplicate the pictogram, then I will do that. If not, then I have to come up with some other kind of label to describe the hazard of the product. So that brings us to our next participant poll.
Okay, and this is a tough one.
It's a quiz.
It's a quiz. Which SDS section pertains to personal protective equipment? Section 1, Section 4, 7, 8, or 12? And we're going to be quick to vote on this because I see the clock is running. And Gary's got a lot of other cool stuff here yet to go through.
Well, don't we have another hour or two?
This is not GIS, where you have plenty of hours of training. Well, you have time, but we're going to see who knows what about SDS.
Okay.
So there's what they said, and here is what you provided. Uh-oh. My poll's not undoing. I had this trouble the other day. I don't. Stand by.
Yeah, as far as the SDS, sometimes they're hard to read. Sometimes they're hard to decipher, because usually it's for the concentrated product that's in there. And I always use, there's always a couple sections I use, and one is the one for personal protective equipment that, and I've gotten to know it
Okay, and there's your real answers.
Right. So section 8, that's the one that I keep in my mind ever since the globalized harmonization system and the SDSs came out. I always knew to go to section 8. Now with the MSDS, it was all over the board where to find personal protective. So section 1, of course, it's the identification, and then section 4, could be important for first aid measures. Section 7, any storage and handling issues, and then 8, like I said, covers exposure controls and personal protection, and section 12 is any ecological information. So if there was a spill on on the turf, there's as far as mobility, you'll cover like mobility in the soil, toxicity, if it's toxic to fish, if it's the biodegradable or not biodegradable. So those are some of the information that pertains to, if it gets spilled on turf itself. All right, so in the shop itself, we've got just a standard solvent-based parts washer. We've got an eye wash unit fairly close to it, because if you were to get an issue and you weren't wearing your PPE, or it somehow splashed, you got the eye wash station close by. The regulation is with an eye wash, you have to be within 10 seconds of the area that needs an eye wash, unobstructed pathway. Now, there's something wrong with this particular picture here, and this parts washer should be closed. A couple different reasons. One, fire. The other one is what we'll call VOC, volatile organic compounds. So we want to keep this closed up so that we're not, letting these compounds float out into the air. And the other reason would be fire. And this is another thing I have to run around and close up quite frequently. If you do any abrasive blasting, there's a maintenance part. There's a few things we do. I make sure we've got the appropriate PPE, and I use a product called Black Beauty, which is slag. It's like zero silica. The years of sandblasting are long gone, because silica itself gets such a bad name in any kind of form like this, because you break it into small particles, and the problem with silicosis is well documented over the years. So stay away from silica. Quite frequently in the wintertime, we need to exhaust fumes. We're working on equipment. Here's a fume exhauster that we can hook right to the muffler. We can run this engine if we need to check it, tune it up, and find out, certain problems, and not smoke ourselves out of the shop. This particular fume exhauster, this hose will pop off, and then there's like a little screen goes on here, and if you're doing any kind of point source extraction, fume extraction, like welding, like maintenance welding, well, on a certain area, you can pull this down, and it just sucks the fumes right out. So painting, we've got a Binks paint booth, and we do not a lot of painting. We do enough to maintain the equipment. So and this occurs mainly in the off season. So some of the things that with painting, and as far as how you handle solvents, is I've got a paint gun washer here, which is nice because there's a lid here and it closes. That way I can wash my paint gun without spraying it out. That way I can keep the VOC. VOC is really drives how regulate, you know, your painting and paint booth, and whether you need an air permit. And fortunately, our paint volume. This is another cabinet I keep all our painting supplies in, and this is in an area that's kind of similar to what's in the pesticide storage building. It's secondary containment. There's a little step down, so we keep all our flammables in one room. Here we go with the VOC. We keep track of when we spray paint. Keep track of the product, you know, the paint usage, the gallonage, the VOC, because there's and I think it's 10, let's see, 10 gallons of VOC a day for 10 pounds a day, I should say, of VOC to be exempt on your paint booth. So that's a lot of product to be spraying. We don't even come close to that. So as far as keeping track of, you know, your maintenance, and, you know, we just create up a little simple spreadsheet. We just keep track every time we spray how much material spray and what it was, so that we keep records like this. And that way, you know where you stand with, you know, your generation of VOC and, you know, air permitting or not air permitting required. Here's a little brochure. The OSHA on-site. Like I said, I can't say enough. It's been a great service for us. One of the things they offer is industrial hygienists. Here we're actually measuring for silica. We were doing some top dressing of greens, doing a little sweep and fill, sweeping it in. We had a hygienist come in and set this particular operator up with here's a little pump here, and then there's this little area that the air is pulled through here. So whatever this operator is breathing, so this is in the breathing zone while he's doing this operation, and it pulls it down here and catches that. Like I said, we were looking for silica exposure, and, you know, in this case, you know, the silica exposure was very minimal. It was way below threshold level. But it's a service that's offered and it's free, so it's good to utilize these services, and then kind of get an idea where you are, because if you have a hazard, you have to establish that you have a hazard before you can protect for a hazard. So, you know, when you establish that there's no hazard, then this operator can wear what we call this filtering face piece as a voluntary reason, because there's no known hazard, but he feels comfortable wearing a face dust mask. And we follow this, like I said, this Part D on the use of a dust mask. One of the other things we have is to keep inventory. Is this oil. We buy oil in bulk in drums, and you can see here we've got a couple diaphragm pumps. These are air operated. They said this room here is what we call explosion proof. Everything in it is explosion proof because we store our painting solvents and mixed paints in there. So we would bring a drum of oil in here, and there's a wand attached to this hose, and then there's another hose here. We connect to one of these outlets, and we pump the drum up above into these 65-gallon cubes. So that way we can have bulk oil and minimal space, and this system is very clean. One thing I want to point out is color coding works great. Operators get it. If you got any used oil left over after you poured in this spout container, then you know what it is. Recycling, we promote recycling here of as much items as we can. We've got a separate dumpster, handle these items. And what's nice about it is that we're filling that dumpster up, and it's hauled away at a reduced rate than the regular trash dumpster. So we still have the regular trash dumpster, but we try to put as many items that are recyclable in this recycling dumpster. One thing that I did this past year is how EPA offers a similar service to the OSHA on site. It's the Office of Compliance Assistant and Pollution Prevention, and it's a free and confidential assistance. And they will come out and do, if you want them, you can do an on-site of your facility, and you can look at certain areas where you have questions about, and they can help you handle, like for instance, the paint VOC, and determine whether you need an air permit or not. Go through those calculations and say, oh, you're not using that much material, so you're what you called exempt. So I've used them for making sure our recycling of used oil and some of those things are the way they should be. And like I said, I've used them this first year, so I plan to use them again. Used oil recycling, it's fairly straightforward. One thing that I particularly do is make sure either I punch a hole here close to the bottom of the filter, or you want to punch a hole in the anti-drain valve that's in there to make sure you get all the oil out of the filter. Engine oil filters have this anti-drain valve that keeps some of the oil in the filter. So I don't have a crusher, but the company that handles our waste oil will take the filters. This here happens to be a waste oil drum that we have overhead. The waste oil. This is the hauler, the truck driver. He has to pull a sample from waste oil. Used to not be that way, but anymore they have to follow the the regulation, make sure they're hauling what they say they're hauling, and it's used oil. So that's one thing about the things that have changed. It's no longer waste oil, it's used oil. And I still catch myself saying waste oil. The signs that are required have changed, and it must say used oil. So I had to go back through and change all my old signs that used to say waste oil. Here's some of the components in this room that we have. Here's explosion-proof lighting, dry chemical system, fire suppression system, and up above is the used oil tank, and then it's piped down here to a valve. When the truck comes in, he just hooks his hose up, opens that valve up, and away it goes. And of course, there's always paperwork generated, so there's a used oil manifest generated so that you know where your oil is going. It's going to be recycled. So that brings us to our, I think, last participant poll.
Yes, and it's a quiz also, isn't it? What quantity of used solvents would have to be generated each month to be considered a small quantity generator? And let me ask you, Gary, is that a state or is that a federal?
Okay, so it's federal, but it's state. There's it could change.
It's one of those, like a lot of that. And
it's a guideline.
And that's partly why I bring that up at this time while they're voting, because I know that a lot of regulations, there's a federal guideline and then there's a state guideline. And when we talk about pesticide or fungicide applications and using products, a lot of the guys on the line have heard me say the label is the law. It's a similar type of situation here with a lot of the things you've talked about today. You have to know what your state or locale the regulations are, right?
Right. Yes. Yes. And that's like in the beginning, I said, the local and state regulations can be different.
Right. And so here we see this is the information that the poll, here are poll answers.
So and it's not really, there's a little, it's a little vague because they measure it in kilograms, but
Oh,
they
okay.
kind of give it an equivalent of roughly 27 gallons. So you want to stay under that monthly generation of 27 gallons. I mean, I don't get anywhere close to that. I mean, I've got a parts washer, and then maybe you generate a little bit of solvent. So you want to stay in that that lower end, because once you get to the small quantity generator and you get to large quantity, there's a lot of reporting requirements involved. So unless the golf course was like multi-facility, or it was very big, or they were doing some other kind of operation, they may generate that on a monthly basis. But I would say for the most part, stay under that. They call it basically half a drum. 25 gallons. I think in the BPM manual it says 25 gallons. So that brings me to hazardous waste. I keep a drum here. I keep it labeled, and it's mostly paint solvents. There might be some gasoline. Somebody poured some diesel in the gasoline, and it happens infrequently. But if you can't use it for anything else, then this is where it goes. One thing you want to make sure is that you date it, accumulation start date, so you know how fast you're generating the waste. And then before this will be transported, there'll be a sample taken, sent to the lab. They know what it is. They'll create this manifest. So there'll be more paperwork, and then once the paperwork is created, then the material can be hauled to where it needs to be. Most of the time, the solvent-based hazardous waste becomes fuel, becomes mixed in with other products to become what we call industrial fuel. Okay, so I'm looking at my clock here, and I touch on a couple more things. Solid waste, scrap metal. Most people don't think of that as solid waste, but if you're a course that you like to let things build up and start to look like a junkyard, and it tends to be kind of like waste. What's nice about scrap metal is you get paid for it. Used tires, typically you have to pay to have those recycled. And one thing in Ohio, I know that you cannot haul more than 10 used tires without being licensed to do it. And I can only guess they're just afraid of people just dumping tires off. Batteries, not only lead acid batteries, but even the small cell batteries, lithium batteries. That's another thing that's considered solid waste. And this last thing here, this happens to be a rain barrel. I had several plastic drums that had wetting agent in it, and I called my local recycle, and they're like, well, they're too big for us to handle. It's like you have to cut them up and throw them in the trash. I'm like, well, that didn't sound too good. And they said, well, wait a minute. Soil and Water Conservation was looking for plastic barrels to create rain barrels. So it was a repurposing, which I felt good about. They felt good about. So it was there's always avenues for handling some of these products that there's still probably benefit to somebody else, but you need to move them along, not accumulate. Fueling operations, they used to be below ground because of fire. Now above ground because you worry about leaks, contaminating the ground. So probably early 91, we had installed these fuel tanks with their 1,000-gallon tanks, secondary containment, and then we decided to put a roof over it So we keep rainwater out of these secondary containment dikes. They've got labels. We labeled with the Department of Transportation numbers, and I think we mainly did that was if there was an emergency or an issue and some local authority had to come in. They're used to reading these numbers and knowing what the product is, and so we labeled them with both conventional, wording and with the number of the product per Department of Transportation. Emergency stop button required. We've got a fire extinguisher here, and then we have a fire extinguisher located on the building across from it, because if you have a fire, you might want to run. Maybe if it's small enough, you can grab this extinguisher, or maybe want to go to the other building. So we've got a couple options there. Spill kit, it's important. It's part of your spill prevention countermeasure plan. And one thing, if you have a spill kit, make sure you do the training. If the kit's there and nobody knows how to use it, then there's a good chance that if a spill happens, and this is for a small spill, this isn't for if this tank ruptures and this secondary containment gave away, that would be part of your catastrophe plan. So make sure if you have a spill kit and you provide the training for it. It basically simple products, and then after that, of course, you have to dispose of properly. Equipment washing, it's the last subject touch on here. Air works great. We try to use air as much as possible. Wash water should flow to an oil separator before draining into an approved, sanitary. Consider using closed loop wash systems, and definitely try to cut down on the amount of water used. Here we just we've got a fairly large air compressor. We can blow off, especially if it's mowing in the afternoon and it's dry, it blow off very nicely. We've got an indoor wash area with a steam cleaner here, natural gas fired. This trough leads to a oil separator. This is a company, we have it cleaned out periodically. They come in, they pull a sample of what's in there. They will pump this out. They will pressure wash it back out. An oil separator, basically just a baffle system, and oil floats on top. We also have them pump out our pit that's below the lift that was been in there since the building was built, and it's basically just kind of a mini oil separator. So we have them pump that out as well while they're in here. There again, there's a manifest generated, and there's paperwork, and all this paperwork you keep track of. I've got files of paperwork. They always say cradle to grave. It's good to keep track of it, make copies, because sometimes and I started scanning stuff in, because now I got a digital copy, because some of the paperwork that they use, it's just kind of like the numbers and the signatures and everything just kind of like fade away throughout the years. Closed loop system. This is a system at Moraine Country Club. And it has its benefits and it has its drawbacks, because with it there's quite a bit of maintenance. There's plates in here that need to be cleaned periodically. There are what they call them bugs, but they're really microbes that have to be put into the system periodically. So a little bit of expense. But if you don't have access or the ability or approval to run through an oil separator in a sanitary system, then you're kind of faced with some kind of closed loop system. And then this is part of that system. It's an indoor wash area, which is nice. So this in here, there's a sump pump which pumps the wash water into the system, and then there's a couple hose reels here that are hose racks for dispensing the water when you wash. So that was kind of a quick go through on the equipment washing. Probably could have been a 2-hour. And if there's any questions on that.
Thanks, Gary. It's funny, we used to have, when I had CD courses, we had an equipment washing course that was on CD that was several hours worth of content. A lot of great information that you provided for us today. We appreciate that. As many people listening know, there is a push for best management practices to be documented in the golf industry. Mark Johnson and his team, Emily Fugger, have worked really hard with getting all of those in the different chapters. More information is available on the website. One of your handouts is the Best Management Practices Guide, which Gary used in putting together his information today. So lots more detail is available on that. In terms of questions, if you have some now, raise your hand or type those in the question and answer box. There is one that is here about your used oil. Would you install a used oil shop heater?
Well, so I'm sold on my gas tube infrared heaters, and I don't generate enough used oil that I'm afraid I would run out somewhere part through the winter. So I don't want to get into the situation where I have to go hunt down like some used oil. So we thought about it, and with the way the heat system is, and I've had this gas tube infrared system in for probably 20 some years, and I absolutely love it. So I would not.
Might be an interesting option for some folks.
It
Golf Industry Show is coming up. We're early this year, the end of January. Would love to see you all come to Orlando. Part of what will be happening there, Gary is teaching a seminar with Nick Christians and Frank Wong, and is also going to be one of the hosts for an equipment management session roundtable that should be interesting. There will be a number of free BMP education offerings, so you should visit Golf Industry Show if you haven't already signed up. If you don't mind answering, how much did the pesticide storage facility end up costing?
Okay, so when we built that, and this is mid-90s, we're probably looking at about $125,000 at the time. Now, a lot of that work we had done as far as floor coating, because when we looked at having it done, it was going to be like $8 a square foot, and I think we did it both the mixed load area and the other 2 storage rooms for right around $1,000. So, and then we painted the building ourselves. So we did some. We actually excavated the foundation ourselves. So taking that into account, you probably could be, in this day and age, 200,000, 250.
If you did not hear me say so at the top of the hour, handouts are available in your GoToWebinar control panel, and plans of the building are one of those handouts. Gary also has a couple of articles that he has written that we've included there. So again, lots of great content for your use. I'm seeing no other questions. Gary, did you have any other closing remarks for us today?
I think what's nice is that having the handouts there, and if somebody has any questions about, because I have a wealth of information, and you can get a hold of me, and we're always great. That's what's great about this industry, is sharing information. I know I kind of toward the end went through some of the items fairly quick, but I would enjoy hearing, any questions or comments would be great. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Gary. Appreciate it. Handouts will be available as we put this into the Learning Hub as an on-demand as well. You'll all be enrolled there in a live event so that you can return and listen to parts of the recording as it may be appropriate. I will get your education points processed. It's probably going to be the first of next week, however. I want to thank you all for joining us. As you exit, will please provide your feedback on the evaluation survey. And I also want to thank Carissa for captioning for us today. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Gary. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.